Washington, D.C., 1967. Wisconsin Avenue is thick with the humid, suffocating air of a summer evening. Across the street from a small, unremarkable park near the Soviet embassy, a gray Ford Econoline van sits idling. It's been there for hours. To any passerby, it's just a delivery vehicle. But inside, the air is freezing, cooled by a massive, struggling air conditioning unit designed to protect millions of dollars in sensitive electronics. 3 men sit in the cramped interior. They aren't soldiers. They aren't even field agents. They are technicians from the CIA's Office of Research and Development. Their eyes are glued to a small black and white monitor. One man wipes sweat from his upper lip, his hand trembling slightly. On the floor of the van, sitting calmly on a piece of felt, is a gray and white tabby cat. This cat is not a pet. It is, at this very moment, the most sophisticated piece of espionage technology on the planet. Inside its ear canal is a microscopic microphone. At the base of its skull, a high-frequency radio transmitter. Threaded through its fur, following the exact line of its spine down to the tip of its tail, is a wire antenna thinner than a human hair. The target? 2 high-ranking Soviet officials sitting on a park bench exactly 52 meters away. The CIA has tried bugs. They've tried directional mics. They've tried human double agents. Everything failed. The Soviets are too smart. They talk in the open, in the wind, where traditional surveillance is useless. But they won't suspect a cat. "Ready?" one technician whispers. His finger hovers over the rear door release. "Receivers are green. Audio is crystal," the second replies. The third man picks up the cat. He doesn't pet it. He holds it like a fragile porcelain bomb. Deploying in 3, 2, 1. The door cracks open. The cat is placed gently on the pavement. It stands for a second, ears twitching, sensing the DC traffic. The technicians hold their breath. This is the culmination of 5 years of secret surgeries, top-tier animal training, and a budget that could have funded a small space program. Total cost, $20 million. The cat takes a step toward the park, then another. It's working. But then, the cat stops. It doesn't look at the Soviets. It looks across the street. Something catches its eye. Maybe a bird, maybe a flickering light. It turns away from the mission and trots directly into the path of oncoming traffic. A yellow taxi, speeding to make a light, never even slows down. A dull thud, the screech of tires, and then a silence so heavy it feels like it's crushing the van. 10 minutes. That's how long the world's most expensive spy lived in the field. 5 years of planning, $20 million of taxpayer money, and the most advanced bionic surgery in history, all neutralized by a 40-cent taxi fare. But how did we get here? How did the smartest minds in the American intelligence community convince themselves that a house cat was the secret weapon to winning the Cold War? To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning, to a time of total desperation, where the line between brilliant and insane had completely disappeared. To understand why the CIA threw $20 million at a tabby cat, you first have to understand the sheer, agonizing frustration of Washington, D.C. in the early 1960s. This wasn't just a city, it was a chessboard, where the pieces were invisible and the stakes were nuclear annihilation. The Soviet embassy on 16th Street was the ultimate black box. To the CIA, it was a fortress of silence. Inside those walls, the KGB had created a vacuum where information went in, but nothing ever came out. They didn't just have guards, they had layers of lead shielding, acoustic dampeners, and a counterintelligence team that swept for bugs every single hour. American agents were obsessed. They tried everything. They tried laser microphones, that could pick up the vibrations of window glass, but the Soviets installed heavy velvet curtains and double-paned noise-canceling glass. They tried planting high-gain transmitters in the walls during renovations, but the Soviets found them within days and used them to feed the CIA hours of fake, mind-numbing propaganda. The Soviets were masters of the game of shadows. They knew that walls had ears, so they stopped talking inside. When a high-ranking Soviet diplomat had to discuss something truly sensitive, the deployment of missiles, the names of double agents, or the movements of the Soviet fleet, they did something brilliantly simple. They walked out the front door. They would stroll across the street to a small public park. They'd find a bench in the center of an open clearing, far away from any buildings, trees, or bushes, where a microphone could be hidden. They knew the physics of sound. In an open space, a human voice dissipates quickly. Unless an American agent was standing 3 feet away, they were invisible. And the CIA couldn't stand 3 feet away. The moment a man in a trench coat sat on a nearby bench, the Soviets would switch to talking about the weather or simply walk away. The park bench strategy was a middle finger to the most advanced surveillance agency in the world. In the hallways of the CIA's Office of Research and Development, ORD, the atmosphere was becoming toxic. Directorates were demanding results. The Cold War was heating up, and the US was flying blind. They needed a way to get a microphone onto that bench without a human being attached to it. They looked at birds, but birds were too erratic. They looked at dogs, but a stray dog in a high-security zone attracts animal control. Then, during a late-night brainstorming session, fueled by too much caffeine and a looming deadline, a scientist looked at a photo of the park. He saw a cat. A simple, stray, unremarkable cat wandering near a trash can. Nobody looks at a cat. A cat can sit under a bench for an hour and the world ignores it. In that moment, the Acoustic Kitty was born. It wasn't born out of a stroke of genius. It was born out of a desperate, cornered agency that had run out of traditional options. They weren't just looking for a spy. They were looking for a miracle, and they were willing to pay any price to build one. But as they would soon find out, the laws of physics are much easier to break than the laws of nature. Inside the windowless rooms of the CIA's Office of Research and Development, ORD, there was a specific kind of madness. This wasn't the madness of a lunatic. It was the madness of brilliant men with an unlimited budget and a crushing sense of failure. By 1961, the ORD was under immense pressure. The traditional tools of espionage were failing against the Soviets' park bench strategy. They had reached a technological dead end. But in the world of intelligence, when you hit a wall, you don't stop. You look for a crack. The crack, it turned out, was biological. The brainstorming sessions were legendary. They started with birds. Pigeons were the first choice. They had been used in World War II, after all. But pigeons are easily spooked and impossible to keep in one spot for more than a few seconds. Then they looked at dogs. A dog is loyal. A dog follows orders. But a dog in a high-security park is a magnet for attention. People want to pet dogs. Guards want to check their collars. A dog is a loud presence. Then someone, whose name remains redacted in many declassified files, suggested the cat. The logic was, on paper, flawless. A cat is the ultimate urban ghost. It can sit in a shadow for 6 hours and not be noticed. It has a natural, predatory stealth. More importantly, in the 1960s, Washington, D.C. was crawling with strays. A cat sitting near a bench where 2 diplomats were discussing the fate of the world wouldn't raise a single eyebrow. To the Soviets, it was just a nuisance or a piece of the scenery. To the CIA, it could be a $20 million ear. But there was a fundamental clash of cultures inside the agency. On one side, You had the field agents, the men who actually had to stand in the shadows and watch. They were skeptical. They knew that a cat's primary loyalty is to its own stomach and its own whims. One veteran agent reportedly joked, "You can't even get a cat to come when you call it for dinner. How are you going to get it to listen to Khrushchev?" On the other side were the engineers. This was the era of the God complex in American science. We were going to the moon. We were splitting the atom. To these men, a cat was just a biological chassis. It was a vehicle that needed an upgrade. They didn't see an animal. They saw a platform. They believed that if they could just find a way to bypass the cat's brain, to hardwire its instincts, and lace its body with the world's most advanced electronics, they could create the perfect spy. A living, breathing, purring eavesdropping device. The project was officially greenlit under the name Operation Acoustic Kitty. The pitch to the CIA directors was audacious. Give us the funding, and we will give you a spy that can walk through any door, sit on any bench, and never, ever be suspected. The budget was approved. The laboratory was prepped. But as the scientists began their work, they realized that to turn a 5-pound animal into a bionic operative, they would have to perform surgeries that the world had never seen. They were about to push 1960s medical technology to its absolute breaking point. They had the cat. They had the money. Now, they just had to figure out how to put a radio station inside a living heart. The CIA didn't take their chosen cat to a local veterinarian. They took it to a windowless, high-security laboratory in the suburbs of Maryland. This was a place where the air smelled of ozone and antiseptic, where the staff didn't wear scrubs, but white lab coats with government clearance badges. The surgery wasn't just a procedure. It was a 5-year engineering project, focused on a living organism. In 1961, miniaturization was the holy grail of technology. There were no microchips. There were no integrated circuits as we know them today. To build a spy device small enough to fit inside a cat, the CIA's technicians had to hand-solder components under high-powered microscopes. Every wire, every capacitor, every transistor had to be custom-built from experimental materials. First, they addressed the ear. A cat's ear is a masterpiece of biological engineering, capable of hearing frequencies far beyond human range. The CIA decided to hijack it. Surgeons made a deep, microscopic incision into the outer ear canal. They implanted a custom-built microphone, a device no larger than a grain of rice. It was encased in biocompatible plastic to prevent the cat's immune system from attacking it. It was positioned perfectly so that the cat's natural ear movements would act as a directional funnel for sound. Next came the brain, or rather, the transmitter. At the base of the cat's skull, where the head meets the spine, the surgeons carved out a small pocket in the muscle and tissue. Here, they placed the radio transmitter. In the 1960s, a radio of this power would normally be the size of a brick. The CIA's version was the size of a large vitamin pill. They had to ensure it didn't press against the spinal cord, or the cat would be paralyzed. Then came the part that sounds like something out of a Frankenstein novel: the antenna. A radio transmitter is useless without an antenna to broadcast the signal. But you can't have a metal rod sticking out of a cat's back. The Soviets would notice in a heartbeat. The solution was as brilliant as it was disturbing. The engineers developed a wire thinner than a human hair, made of a flexible, conductive alloy. The surgeons spent hours threading this wire from the base of the skull, under the skin, all the way down the cat's spine, and into the very tip of its tail. Every time the cat flicked its tail, a natural, involuntary movement, it was actually adjusting the broadcast range of a multi-million-dollar spy device. Finally, they needed power. All of this equipment, the microphone, The transmitter, the sensors, required electricity. But batteries in 1961 were bulky and leaked toxic chemicals. The ORD scientists developed a custom-shielded battery pack, implanted deep within the cat's abdominal cavity. When the surgery was over, the cat was stitched up with surgical precision. They used specialized techniques to ensure that as the fur grew back, there would be no visible scarring, no lumps, and no signs of the $20 million of hardware humming beneath the skin. For months, the cat lived in the lab under 24-hour observation. It recovered. It moved normally. It purred. Looked like any other stray you'd find in a Washington alleyway. You could pick it up, pet it, and look it in the eye, and you would never know that you were holding a bionic weapon designed to steal the Soviet Union's most guarded secrets. The CIA scientists were ecstatic. They had achieved the impossible. They had turned a living creature into a machine. But as they would soon discover, they had forgotten one crucial detail. They had upgraded the body, but they hadn't changed the mind. And a cat's mind is a very dangerous place to invest $20 million. Let's talk about the number. $20 million. In 1967, that kind of money was astronomical. To put it into perspective, adjusted for inflation today, we are talking about nearly $200 million. For context, you could have bought 5 Boeing 727 jetliners for that price. You could have funded a small nation's military for a year. Instead, the CIA spent it on a 5-pound cat. But where did the money actually go? It wasn't just buying a cat. You can get a stray for free in any DC alley. No, this money disappeared into the black hole of the CIA's unvouchered funds. First, there was the material science cost. Because the electronics had to live inside a biological environment, they couldn't use standard copper or plastic. Everything had to be custom engineered from rare, non-reactive metals like gold and platinum to prevent the cat's body from going into septic shock. A single microphone, no bigger than a grain of rice, cost more than a luxury house in Georgetown. Then, there was the specialized labor. The CIA didn't just hire regular vets. They recruited the top neurosurgeons, acoustic engineers, and radio specialists from the country's leading universities. These men were paid triple their normal salaries to drop everything, sign non-disclosure agreements that threatened them with life in prison, and move into secret government housing. Then came the infrastructure. Operation Acoustic Kitty required its own dedicated laboratory, a climate-controlled surgical suite, and a specialized testing facility that mimicked the exact acoustic conditions of the park near the Soviet embassy. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars just on high-speed cameras and audio analysis computers that occupied entire rooms, all to track the movements of one cat. And don't forget, the Trial and Error Fund. This wasn't the only cat. Declassified hints suggest there were multiple prototypes. Some cats' bodies rejected the implants. Some transmitters burned out during testing. Every time a prototype failed, another $50,000 or $100,000 vanished into the incinerator. To the bureaucrats at the CIA, this wasn't seen as waste. In the heat of the Cold War, they had a blank check mentality. If there was even a 1% chance that this cat could hear a Soviet general mention the location of a nuclear silo, $20 million was considered a bargain. But this is the danger of invisible money. When you have no oversight and an unlimited budget, you stop asking, "Is this a good idea?" And you only ask, "Can we build it?" The CIA had built the world's most expensive biological robot. But as they were about to find out in the training phase, money can buy you gold-plated microphones and the world's best surgeons. But it cannot buy the soul of a predator that has been doing exactly what it wants for the last 10,000 years. The CIA had achieved a miracle of science. They had a cat that was, for all intents and purposes, a walking, purring radio station. But as the surgeon stepped out, the animal trainer stepped in. And that's when the $20 million dream started to unravel. You see, the CIA's Office of Research and Development was filled with engineers who believed that every problem had a technical solution. They thought that because they had replaced the cat's hardware, the software, the cat's brain, would simply follow along. They were wrong. The training phase took place in a top-secret facility designed to look like a typical Washington, D.C. park. They had fake benches, fake Soviet actors, and even speakers playing the sounds of city traffic. The goal was simple. The cat needed to walk to a specific bench, sit within 3 feet of the targets, and stay there for at least 10 minutes. In the first week, the cat didn't move. It sat at the starting line, groomed itself for 20 minutes, and then fell asleep. The trainers tried positive reinforcement, the industry term for cat treats. It was a disaster. The cat would walk to the bench, eat the treat, and then immediately wander off to find a sunny spot to nap. Even worse, the sound of the cat crunching on kibble was so loud that it blew out the sensitive $20 million microphones in its ears. The CIA scientists then encountered a biological bug they hadn't anticipated: hunger. When the cat was hungry, it ignored the mission and looked for food. When the cat was full, it ignored the mission and looked for a bed. To solve this, the scientists actually attempted a second surgery to override the cat's hunger sensors, hoping to create a focused, professional operative. It didn't work. It just made the cat more irritable. By month 3, the reports coming out of the lab were becoming increasingly desperate. One internal memo noted that the cat had a troubling tendency to get distracted by birds, leaves, and entities that were not there. They tried to use ultrasonic whistles to guide it. The cat ignored them. They tried to use laser pointers, which were cutting-edge tech at the time. The cat would chase the red dot, but the moment the light turned off, it would lose all interest in the Soviet Union and start chasing its own tail. The Acoustic Kitty wasn't a spy. It was just a cat that happened to be carrying a mortgage-sized amount of electronics. The agency was at a crossroads. They had spent 5 years and a fortune. Admitting defeat meant career suicide for the project leads. So, they did what any failing government project does. They lowered the bar. They decided that the cat didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be good enough for one single mission. If they could just get it to sit near a bench for 5 measly minutes, they could claim victory. They were betting everything on a 40% success rate in a controlled environment. They were about to take a temperamental animal into the chaos of the real world, praying that it would choose patriotism over a passing butterfly. The van was being prepped. The Bionic spy was in its crate, and the CIA was about to find out that you can't buy loyalty from a creature that thinks it's a god. Washington, D.C., 1967. This is it. The go or no-go moment. Inside the gray Ford Econoline van, the atmosphere is electric with a mix of high-tech anticipation and low-level dread. 3 agents are squeezed into the back. Their knees knock against racks of vacuum tube receivers and reel-to-reel tape recorders that are already spinning, capturing the ambient hum of the city. The heat outside is brutal, but inside, the air is cold enough to see your breath. The machines need to stay cool. The cat needs to stay calm. Target Alpha is on the move, an agent whispers, his eyes glued to a pair of high-powered binoculars. Across the street, 2 men in gray suits emerge from the Soviet embassy. They walk with a purpose. They aren't looking around. They've done this 100 times. They cross the street, enter the small park, and head straight for the designated bench, the fortress of silence. In the van, A technician checks the signal levels. The kitty's heart rate is stable. Microphones are hot. We're picking up the rustle of the felt on the floor. It's perfect. Think about the weight of this moment. 5 years, a literal mountain of taxpayer cash, dozens of surgeries, a team of the world's smartest scientists. All of it, the entire weight of the American intelligence machine, is currently sitting in a small pet carrier on the floor of a van. One agent reaches down and opens the crate. The cat doesn't bolt. It steps out slowly, its bionic tail twitching. Under the fur, that $20 million antenna is ready to broadcast. The agent picks the cat up. He can feel the slight hum of the transmitter at the base of its skull. "They're sitting down," the spotter says. "Bench 4. They're starting to talk." "Now. Deploy now." The driver cracks the side door just a few inches. A sliver of DC humidity cuts through the artificial chill. The sound of the city pours in, honking horns, a distant siren, the chatter of pedestrians. "Remember the training," the agent mutters, more to himself than the cat. "Just walk to the bench. Sit. That's all you have to do. Just be a cat." He steps out of the van, staying low. He walks 10 paces toward the park entrance, his heart hammering against his ribs. He kneels, placing the $20 million operative on the sidewalk. He gives it a light pat on the flank, the signal they'd practiced 1,000 times in the Maryland lab. The agent retreats. The van door slides shut with a metallic clack. Inside, the technicians put on their headphones. They hear the cat's footsteps on the concrete. Click, click, click. They hear its breathing. Through the binoculars, they see the cat stop. It looks at the park. It looks at the bench. It's only 40 yards away. "He's looking at them," a technician says, a grin beginning to spread across his face. "He's going. Oh my God, he's actually going." For 3 glorious seconds, the CIA believed they had won the Cold War. They believed they had outsmarted nature. They believed they were geniuses. But as the cat took its 4th step, its ears suddenly swiveled 180 degrees. It wasn't looking at the bench anymore. It was looking at the street. And in the world of a cat, a Soviet secret is nothing compared to the sudden, irresistible movement of a yellow object in the corner of its eye. The 0 hour was over. The disaster hour had just begun. For several minutes inside the van, there was no sound, except for the steady, rhythmic spinning of the magnetic tape reels. The agent stared through the glass, watching the yellow taxi disappear into the DC traffic. On the asphalt, 30 meters away, lay $20 million of the world's most advanced technology, and the only thing the CIA could do was drive away. They couldn't retrieve the body. To step out and pick up a dead cat filled with miniaturized radio transmitters in front of the Soviet embassy would have been an international incident, would have been the ultimate embarrassment. So, they did the only thing a secret agency could do. They abandoned the operative to the street cleaners and drove back to Langley in total soul-crushing silence. But the story didn't end on that street. In the world of government intelligence, a failure isn't a failure until it's written down on paper. When the scientists and project leads had to report to their superiors, they didn't lead with the words, "The cat got hit by a car." Instead, they crafted a masterpiece of bureaucratic doublespeak. The final report for Operation Acoustic Kitty, which wouldn't be declassified until 2001, is a fascinating look into the mind of an agency trying to protect its budget. The report admitted that the project was not viable for real-world intelligence gathering, but it quickly pivoted. It claimed that the project was a remarkable scientific achievement. They argued that they had proven that sensors could be implanted in animals, that signals could be transmitted from biological platforms, and that the CIA's engineers were pioneers of a new frontier. In other words, the surgery worked, but the environment was uncooperative. The project was officially scrapped in 1967. The remaining prototypes, the other cats waiting in the lab, reportedly had their expensive electronics surgically removed and were given away to unsuspecting families. Somewhere in the suburbs of Virginia in the 1970s, there were probably house cats roaming around with slightly stiff necks and very strange medical histories, never knowing they were once destined to be the vanguard of American espionage. Operation Acoustic Kitty became a legend in the halls of Langley, a cautionary tale of what happens when you have too much money and too little common sense. It was filed away under Project Abandoned, and for decades, the public had no idea that their tax dollars had been used to build a bionic tabby. But why did they do it? Was it just the cat? Or was Acoustic Kitty part of a much larger, much darker pattern of behavior within the CIA during the Cold War? To understand the true legacy of this failure, we have to look at the other monsters they were creating in the basement. Because as crazy as the cat was, it wasn't the most dangerous thing they were working on. The death of the $20 million cat wasn't just a failure of a mission. It was a reality check for the most powerful nation on Earth. Operation Acoustic Kitty was born from a specific kind of arrogance, the belief that with enough money, enough technology, and enough will, you can rewrite the laws of nature. The Cold War was an era of the impossible. We were reaching for the stars, splitting atoms, and trying to master the human mind. In the basements of Langley, the cat was just the tip of the iceberg. This was the same era as Project MK Ultra, where the CIA spent millions trying to find a mind-control drug. It was the era of Project Stargate, where they hired psychic spies to try and view Soviet bases using only their minds. When you look at Acoustic Kitty alongside these projects, a pattern emerges. The CIA wasn't just fighting the Soviets. They were fighting the unpredictable nature of reality itself. They wanted a world where everything, from a spy's thoughts to a stray cat's instincts, could be programmed, tracked, and controlled. But the yellow taxi on Wisconsin Avenue taught them a lesson that still resonates today. You can build a bionic ear, you can thread an antenna through a spine, and you can spend a fortune on the world's best surgeons. But you cannot delete the soul of a living thing. A cat will always be a cat. It will always choose a bird over a broadcast. It will always choose its own path over a government mission. In our modern world of AI, facial recognition, and autonomous drones, the story of Acoustic Kitty feels like a funny, distant memory. We think we are much smarter now. We think our technology is foolproof. But every time a billion-dollar satellite is taken down by a piece of space junk, or a sophisticated algorithm is fooled by a simple sticker, the ghost of the $20 million cat is there, laughing in the shadows. It reminds us that no matter how much we spend, the world is still a chaotic, beautiful, and stubbornly uncontrollable place. So, the next time you see a stray cat sitting quietly in a park, take a second look. Is it just a cat? Or is it a reminder that some things in this world are simply not for sale, and certainly not for rent? If you found this story as mind-blowing as we did, hit that subscribe button. It's the only way to make sure you don't miss our next deep dive into the strangest corners of history. And tell us in the comments, if you had $20 million in 1967, what would you have spent it on? Hopefully, something that doesn't chase birds.